So welcome back, everybody, to the Uncommon Element. I'm your host, Josh Meunier. I'm excited to bring you the Jessica Dennehy today and her fascinating story about being uncommon. I've known Jessica actually now for the better part of, I think, like a year and a half, which is cool. But I know a lot about your backstory and, how you've gone from like corporate lawyer working on Wall Street and the SEC to, now owning multiple barbershops in New York and overseas, which is pretty rad. To being a published author, right? Like that's one of the things that I noticed about you the most is you are out there. You are definitely out in the communities, writing for Forbes, writing for other magazines. You have your own book, Pivot and Slay, which kills it. You're a professional coach for clients. I know that's one of your major passions, which I can't wait to dive into. But I think also, one of the most amazing things about Jessica is she's also a mom and she juggles all of these things, right? She's a single mom with two awesome daughters. You see it on her social all the time, which is really, really cool. And I find that to be fascinating because I know you have to juggle a lot of things in your life, Jessica. And, it's fascinating and both mysterious all at the same time because that transition from corporate lawyer and the journey that you've been on now to living this life of like influence, positivity, and honestly, like consistency is just awesome to watch. And I know people will get a ton of value from you today. But I do want to say, sorry. Yeah, you're welcome. I can't help it because I could go on for days about Jessica and like her influence and the things that she's been able to accomplish. But, most recently she's gotten that blue check mark, which a lot of people aspire to, which is like that uncommon influence. And, I'm really curious about diving into some of that journey with you, and really where that started for you, as like a goal to get that blue check and really become this influence across your community.
All right, that's a lot. Okay, so I'm just gonna let it flow and however it comes out because the thing is funny, whenever you're on a show, everyone always wants this like structured story about your come up. But I
Sure.
think like it's fascinating to just kind of go into all the different parts of it because they're so interconnected. And I'll start anywhere. Like, first of all, my goal right now is to become a big influence in the business community because it took me a long time before I recognized how powerful I actually am. And I don't mean that in an arrogant way, because I think anyone that knows me would say I'm not arrogant, but
No,
I think I just
not at
own.
all, actually.
Well, thank you. I think I just own who I am now, and I hadn't done that before. And there's a lot of power inside of that. And the more you own who you are unapologetically, I think the more power you garner. And so I just started liking myself a lot more. That's how the whole thing began, really, is I sat down one day, thought, man, like I really love this. Like, how can I turn this into a business? Because I love it. And if you love something, you will pour all that amazing energy into it. If you have a career that you hate, the energy of your hatred for that career
Yeah.
is going to be threaded through what you do too. So I thought, how cool would it be for me to do something I love every single day? And that's kind of where it started. But in order to give my passion to other people and help them aspire to their dreams, I really have to live out my own.
Yeah.
And that's not just as a business consultant or coach. I also have to do that as a parent. And
Sure.
once I realized that moment was really pivotal because I thought like, oh hell, I got to do a lot of inner work here to really show up as my best self and get to all the aspirations that would get me blue checks, that would get me into Forbes, that would get me, all the accomplishments that I want. And so I started doing that deep dive, and that's what started it all.
That's so
And
cool.
I like by nature, I really like to write. So I kind of started there.
That's cool. That's very cool. Yeah. You and I share that similar passion of writing, and I find it as like a form of therapy almost, for me to be able to put my thoughts down on paper, and also go back and relive experiences, good and bad, and understand, what the foundation is behind that. Um, and it's interesting because, and I'd love to get your take on this, right? Is this idea of emotional intelligence, right? And you have a massive amount of emotional intelligence. And what you just described, I would probably baseline it as like self-awareness, right? Of, what you want, where you want to go, who you are as a person and owning that, right? And then being able to like self-regulate. So, like, all right, I'm in this zone, right? Now I know exactly kind of the bullseyes of where I want to go in terms of my goals. But you have to have motivation behind that too, right? And they break it down. They break it down of like five central pieces of emotional intelligence, right? And those being self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and then social skill. When I see you, and I see you out in like social environments and things like that, it's like, okay, she's got all of these areas checked. And it's interesting because a lot of people really struggle in one, two, or all of those areas. Yet you seem to have, an uncommon way of being able to not only attract people to you, but additionally you have this foundation that I feel like is probably the basis of that, of why people like look at you and see you as that form of influence and power, like you had mentioned, right? Stepping into that power as like you as a woman, right? So
That's a tremendous compliment. So thank you very much for saying all of that.
you're welcome. You're welcome. um you know
I have a thought actually, if I may. I don't want to interrupt your
no,
flow
go
there.
ahead. No, by all means, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, one thing I hate when people say is like, this is who I am. I think real emotional intelligence comes from the power to balance owning who you are and not being apologetic about it, while at the same time understanding that you can always do better and not in a judgmental way. So you're not judging yourself when you make a mistake, you
Yeah.
own it. And then you say to yourself, how can I do it better next time? And who can I ask for feedback from that will allow me to grow in this area? And so, yes, you have to be yourself and you have to own who that is, but that doesn't give you the right to be all of you all the time, no matter the circumstance, because then that's a lack of self awareness and regulation. And so, I think for me, one thing I've always been really strong at, and sometimes to a fault before I understood my own worth, and was I would always be looking for feedback. And at first, it was because I was so judgmental of myself that I was like, I know I'm not good enough. I know I'm not doing it the best I can. And so I need to go figure out how to do it better. But it wasn't coming from a good place. It was coming from a place of me judging myself. Now I'm like, well, I'm just going to do the best that I can in this moment as who I am at this exact second. I'm just going to go out there and crush it in the way that I know how, but keeping an open mind that like I can make these small nuanced changes that will elevate me in the future, and knowing and discerning who I can trust to give me that feedback that I need, that's constructive but also encouraging at the same time.
Yeah. That's cool. I mean, that's actually really, that's a huge statement right there. Is, not only is it constructive, but having, that type of positivity to it. I mean, we're humans. We're not positive all the time, right? But within leadership roles, it's obviously really, really impactful when, you deliver a message like that, to somebody that you can go either way on that, right? Like some people can get
Yeah.
offended, and then others are like, yes, please tell me as much as you can. But the delivery tactics in that have to be different for who you're talking to, right? Like,
100%. And as a leader, you have to be able to admit when you don't know something or you haven't done your best either. And I kind of made a statement like that to my staff just yesterday. My staff at the barber shops,
mhm.
one of them made a mistake that was pretty severe. And I just said to the group, we're a team. So any decisions we make and any mistakes we make and anything we do great, that all reflects on all of us the same. So if I make a mistake as the leader, that's going to trickle down and affect all of you and all of your families the same way that your mistake just affected all of our families and all of our, the whole company.
Yeah.
And I think just putting it in perspective where you are part of that mix, because I use myself as an example, like
Mhm.
the decisions I make every day for this company affect everyone. And that's why when you come to me with what's going on with you, I always have to look at it from a broader perspective, because the decision I make with you is going to affect everyone. And I think when you lead like that, people are not really afraid to make mistakes.
Mhm.
They know that we can correct, but they do become more intentional with the way that they act, because now they see the gravity of their actions and how that can ripple through everybody. So I think it's maybe just striking a balance between, creating that sense of importance for everything that we do so that you think about it and you act with more purpose, but then allowing yourself and others to be flexible in how they learn and how they grow.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's difficult, right? Because you got to kind of find that healthy balance of, what does that person react best to? Some people have that kick and some people have that cuddle kind of styles, right? And being intentional with how you have that communication with those people is imperative for you to get the results that you want.
Yeah.
And that's cool though that you bring them together, because if it seems like in that you have kind of this bottom up approach, right? Everybody's included and everybody feels part and bought in. And I think a lot of business owners actually struggle with that. Um, and what I found is it normally directly ties back to emotional intelligence and like having a degree of, like you said, feedback, right? But it's just as important for the leaders to get feedback on, how they're perceived throughout the organization, right? As it is for the leader to give any type of employee, feedback like that.
I
And I'm
agree. I agree completely. And you're right. It does all come back to that emotional intelligence piece, because really, in order to receive criticism in a productive way, you have to be really confident in your skill sets. And I
Mhm.
think a lot of entrepreneurs, and I'm going to include myself in this because on my come up, man, I didn't know what I was doing. Like I wasn't who I am now. And I was insecure about that. I was insecure that I didn't know everything. I thought I had to know everything. And so I would sometimes take criticism to heart because it was just confirmation that I wasn't good enough. Like that's
Yeah.
how I interpreted it. So
Mhm.
I think, and a lot of entrepreneurs on there come up where we have our heads down and we're in the hustle and we're trying to like push towards our goals, and half the time we don't know what the heck we're doing and we're just trying stuff to see what works.
Yeah.
And I think in those moments it's really difficult for a leader to look up and see the bigger picture and see the other people who are waiting for guidance and feedback themselves. The people that are reporting to you.
Yep.
And it takes some time to really be comfortable with who you are before you're able to give and receive that, and kind of like get out of the hustle. And that's the number one thing I love to talk about with my entrepreneurs is like, how do we get you out of that ground floor? Because you can only make so much headway on that ground floor. Really, to
Yeah.
rise up in the company, you got to lift your head up and see things from a higher perspective.
Hmm.
And it's hard for people. It's really difficult for people to do. And it's something I only learned through, mistakes and time. Because when I started out, I for sure was not how I am now.
Yeah. But I mean, if you backtrack that, right? Like you guys have, you've owned your barber shops for more than a decade, right? At this point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I mean, 10 years in business, like 10 plus years in business, which is like, that's hard to do. That's really hard to do for a lot of people. And not only that though, it's created kind of this foundation for you to kick off and like create this personal brand that then goes out and is able to deliver this message because you've had all this experience, right?
100%. And the way that I deliver that message is really through writing. I mean, I just write all the time. I write my thoughts down in my journal. I have separate journals. I have journals for my self-development and, personal development. I have journals for my business strategies for my own companies. I have thoughts about what I could teach, the people who are trusting me to mentor them.
Yep.
I write articles like you mentioned for Forbes and Entrepreneur, which were really predicated on all my social media posts. Like I got all of my ideas by just writing from experience every single day in the moment, which was really like a pivotal point for me in my new business because it helped me get really clear on what I love to talk about.
Yeah.
And writing those posts and writing those articles is what's gotten me on stage talking about the things that I love and what got me press, which allowed me to get my blue check. So it's all interrelated. And I think it's an important piece for people to hear because a lot of times they think, I don't have anything interesting to say. I thought that. I thought that too until I started writing stuff down and I realized how much experience I've accumulated throughout the last 10 years as a business owner and even before that as
Right.
a lawyer.
Yeah. Yeah, and which is, I mean, creates an incredible amount of value because a lot of people come to you for legal advice too, by the way, myself
Yeah.
included. So, yeah. So,
But your
no,
listeners should not because I don't
no,
take legal
yeah,
clients. Let's just be clear on that from the
yeah,
start.
yeah. It's by referral only. Sorry. No, but it is cool because I think that all of those. I mean, when I think back to my journey and what I've been able to accomplish and also continue to strive for is predicated on all of that past experience and going back and like you had said, right? And I think it's really cool that you mentioned this is, you keeping separate journals for different parts of your life and those different elements of your life, right? Because it's important that you're monitoring that growth in different areas and so many entrepreneurs, and I'd love your take on this, is they forget to pick their head up and see that they're actually winning and making progress versus being completely stuck in like their day to day.
I agree. And I think, people need to celebrate the smaller wins, which I think is not as common as celebrating the larger ones, because
Right.
what it took for you to get to a large win is a ton of tiny micro wins.
Yeah.
And why are you not taking the time to congratulate yourself on those? Because that's that positive energy. I'm all about the energy. I have this so yes, I'm a type A warrior by nature, but I'm
Mhm.
also like a hippie on the flip side of it with all my energy and
Yeah.
the universe and stuff. And I think those two meshing together is kind of what makes me uncommon
Hmm.
because I can utilize both sides of me. And my hippie side is like, celebrate, guys. Like, why aren't you celebrating this stuff? Because these little teeny wins add up. Like if you're scaling the side of a mountain, you don't just go from zero to the peak, right? You take
Yeah.
these small steps and they're each difficult. And to me, that's something to celebrate. And it actually just makes you more positive, and that positive energy from the celebration just funnels you forward
Yeah.
and pushes you through. So why wouldn't you capitalize on that? For anyone who's like, I'm not into energy, think about it just propelling you forward because you're actually enjoying that moment. So you'll get where you're going faster. Because if you don't like energy, I know you like going places fast because every business owner does.
Yep.
Well, you're going to slow yourself down if you just keep your head down and don't give yourself any credit.
That is true. Yeah. And your energy like recoils through every relationship that you have, business and personal. And it's
Yes.
like and that's that as human beings, right? And I've heard it said this way is like it's like the ether. If you want to explain like how we're all interconnected, like there's this ether and energy between all of us that's passed through that you can't pick up on. But like if you go back and you go through like the studies of when they put people in like this like social situation, like they've found that, you know, within 2 minutes of three people sitting in the same room, the person with the most positive energy, like people will gravitate towards that. If they have somebody that has a much higher negative energy level, the two other people would gravitate towards that subconsciously. And it's incredibly important that you are conscious and self-aware of what energy you're putting out there, right? um
Yes.
it's not possible to be happy all the time. We all get like these peaks and valleys, right? But how quickly do you recover from, you know, those events that kind of set you back is
I
really like,
mean, yeah, and each event's different. Obviously, there's more severe events in our lives that take a little bit more time to recover from. But
yep.
I see a lot of people getting very low on very small events that happen. And to me, that's mind-boggling because any successful person will tell you that they failed way more than they've succeeded.
Mm-hmm.
And it's those little failures that they learned from that really got them to where they are now. So I just don't ever see the point in getting bogged down by the little things. And that's something I learned through the years. And actually, I was forced into
Okay.
because I used to be the kind of person that I had, I guess I would say like, and I was kind of coasting at some points in my life, like most of us, right? And so like I would just be like focused on this minutia that didn't really matter because I wasn't pushing myself hard enough. And so I didn't have that, busy focus that like I was always trying to level up and achieve.
Mm-hmm.
And in those moments, I got the luxury of being able to nitpick and, worry about the small stuff when I got divorced about 7 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
and I got thrown into like a new whirlwind life, not by my own devise,
Yep.
that's really when I didn't have the room to worry about that stuff because I was just so busy trying to rebuild, trying to keep my act together, trying to keep my kids' life on track, trying to build my businesses, that all I had was focus for the really important things. And now that's just how I live. And it definitely infuriates some people because I'm just like, I'm not there yet. I'm not on that yet. You want to talk about 10 steps ahead, but I'm right here in the present moment.
Yep.
And I'm not going to talk about the minutia. That's a couple of steps ahead. I'm looking at big stuff ahead. I've got my sights set on big things, but here in the small stuff, like I'm not going to sweat that. It's just going to be what it is. And that's a talent that takes a lot of a lot of learning to accomplish, but if you can do it, I suggest it because it's a much better life, much more
Yeah.
free, much more happy place to be than stressing over this little stuff that doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, I'll never forget asking you actually, like, how would you handle like haters? And you're like, give them love. That's it. Give them love, positivity, right? And it's interesting, right? This idea of this idea of like a mental Rolodex of like traumatic experiences in your life that set you on like a new course or new path, right? And it seems like maybe you getting divorced 7.5 years ago set you on that path. Was like, I don't want to call it a blessing in disguise. I mean, that would be like the way that you would, however you define it, right? But do you think you'd be here right now without that?
For sure not. For sure not. My view of it, I don't say blessing in disguise. My view of it is you intuitively know what you need,
Mm-hmm.
but half the time you're not even listening because most people listening to this right now, they're not self-aware enough to understand their intuition. But your intuition knows. And you can ignore it for a really long time, but at some point you're just going to get exactly what you need. You're going to get forced into it
Yeah.
because I believe anyway, that there's a path I'm supposed to be on. And if I'm not forcing my way into that direction, something's going to happen that jolts me and gives me that clarity that I can jump on board or I can keep fighting. And fighting in this in this metaphor is a bad thing, right? Because I'm like fighting against what I know is right for me because of reasons I can't even explain to you right now. So my point is, my ex-husband and I were not happy, but neither of us were doing much about it. And so we got forced into the situation that led us to where we are now. And right now, we're both way happier than we ever were before. And we did things we probably wouldn't have done if we stuck around in that unhappy relationship. So I think the universe gave us what we needed. And I was forced into this metamorphosis that made me who I am today. And I would for sure not be here if not for that.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that story. Honestly. I mean, it is. I think it's really important. People
It
deal with
is.
that. Yeah.
It is because what I like to talk about some of the struggles and thread that into the wins because the person you see now didn't exist even a couple of years ago. My version
Mhm.
of myself was different. And so when you look at these people that maybe you're following, you feel inspired by, and that's great. I want you to go out and get inspired 100%. But don't feel like they're so far from where you are because most likely they are not. And I just made a post today about how my life looked just 2 years ago and it was completely different than it is now. So if you're out there and you're struggling and you're like, I can't get it together, I'm not given the same opportunities. I just want you to know, like, you can create these opportunities for yourself and you can change your life in a fairly short time if you really dedicated to the cause.
Yeah. Yeah, and that is, I mean, that's that self-regulation right there is coming back to it and dedicating yourself to most people will kind of like drift through life or get through these periods where they feel like they're drifting through life and they're like, I'm not sure where I'm supposed to go. And you alluded to it earlier, right? Is what's the pathway? Like, okay, I hit this like bump in the road that seemed to sometimes wipe out whatever your future dreams you thought were going to be possible, which means you have to like reconstruct your life in that whatever element that could be, whether that's your marriage, whether that's your business, whether that's like your health and fitness, whether there's all sorts of things that we deal with every single day that eventually you have to just understand that they're just lessons. And unfortunately, like, yeah, they're not always happy lessons, but
Most likely not. And the funny part is that you just said something that made me realize this. All those things you mentioned, health, fitness, marriage, relationships, friendships, family, business, they're all so interconnected. I mean, you're going to have ups and downs in all of them and you're going to feel during certain periods that you're coasting. And the trick is to become aware of what that feels like and catch it early so that you can start to take control. And
mm,
instead of coasting where you're just letting gravity do the job, you start to steer the ship and take life in the direction that you want because you need to be in the driver's seat of all those parts of your life. And usually, when we see someone winning in one aspect, we see them winning in most others. Because if you go into one section of your life with purpose and intent, not before long, you'll see yourself starting to do that in all the other ones too. And
yeah.
it's going to happen because it just becomes part of who you are. And once I started getting serious, for me the journey started with business,
Mm,
because that's just something that comes easier to me. So it's better to start with the easiest thing, right? Like that's just naturally what we flow towards because you can
yep.
get that like quicker win.
Hmm.
But I didn't know what I was doing. Like, even the reason I even started consulting and speaking and writing books is because my barbershops were shut down during the pandemic.
Hmm.
But I didn't just say, I'm going to start speaking and then boom, I got a bunch of jobs. I didn't say I'm just going to start consulting and then boom, made a bunch of money. In fact, I didn't actually know what I wanted to do. So I was doing like trying to figure it out. I started doing like fitness modeling, like, because
Yep.
I love yoga. So I started diving into fitness and yoga and become a yoga instructor. And then I didn't really like that. So I turned to like doing like selling their clothing lines. And I didn't really like that. And then I started doing podcasts. I didn't know where that was going to go. It took me so much trial and error to get to my business
Yeah.
model, to get to understanding where I was going to go with it. But if I hadn't tried, I wouldn't have figured it out. I'd just be sitting at my kitchen table like, huh, I wonder what I'm going to do. right? But I had to try these things to get a good grasp on it. And there's no harm in trying. In fact, sometimes on my social media feed, I see these like ridiculous posts of me like trying on different yoga outfits and posting, and I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. And part of me gets embarrassed, and I'm like, well, F it. Without that, I wouldn't be here. Now,
Yeah.
it seemingly doesn't seem connected at all, right? But it
Right.
is.
Yeah, it
Everything
is.
I tried led me to here, and it's some wacky, wacky way.
No, I think that's super empowering for people because it's like the idea of like implement it, just do it and start, right? A lot of people do the paralysis by analysis, and perfectionism kills more dreams than anything, right? But just start, implement it, analyze as you go, you make the adjustments, and then you eventually evolve, right?
Yeah.
And that's something that um it stops a lot of people. And I tell, even within my own, clients, like I tell them this all the time, is like, look, 20% is better than zero. 1% is better than zero.
Yeah.
Okay. Like, but eventually you'll get to like 50% and 60% and 70%. As long as you're patient and you're disciplined and you're consistent in your actions towards that, it I but I want to be clear on this too, is you have to have a general idea of where you're going. Like you can say, all right, cool. I want $100 million business. Let's just throw that out there, right? Because that seems to be a big wild number that people like to throw out there, right? Well, okay, that's cool, but now you got to backtrack it to like, what's the plan? What are you gonna like backtrack all the way back to 90 days to your daily activities, like you talked about, of being focused and being intentional and being there in the moment, right? Having
Yeah.
the idea of what that bigger result's going to be, but
And for
then,
me, that
yeah,
that path was not financial, which I think if I were advising someone, when I do advise people, I say don't start with the finances,
yep,
because that's not going to bring you happiness. And I truly believe that when you're doing something you really love and you get lit up about,
mm,
like if whatever that is, that's how you're going to funnel all the best passion and energy into it. So for me, in when my businesses were shut down, I'm like, well, what do I love? Well, I love yoga. I love getting deeper into who I am, right? So that's why I leaned into that a little bit.
yeah,
But I also love business, and I didn't really know where I was going to take that, but I just kept pushing towards the things that really light me up, and figured my end goal was I wanted to create a brand that was really aligned with who I am. And I am all these things, right? I'm a parent. I love to go on vacation. I love business. I love making money. I love nice things. And I
mhm,
also love yoga and getting in touch with myself. So, how do I create a brand that encompasses all of that? I had no idea, but I knew that I wanted to have a company that was aligned with me in every single way. And that's what I push towards. So, when you guys are out there thinking of what is your path in crafting your new business plan, make sure that it's not just about the finances. And I know Josh used that just as an example,
yep,
but a
yep.
lot of people will go out there and just be like, I want to make $1 million. Well, congratulations. So does everyone else.
Yeah, welcome to that club. Yeah, no, and you're right. It comes back to, well, who do you want to be in every part of your life, right? Whether, what type of mom or dad do you want to be? What type of, partner do you want to be? What type of friend do you want to be? Right? You can set aspirations for all of those things, because that is your life. Like, and most people, especially younger entrepreneurs, going back to that, is they get lost in that, myself included. When I started my first business, I picked my head up like 3.5 years later, and I was like, sweet, I've got this massively growing business right now, yet I'm completely unfulfilled because I've lost all of the relationships. I've lost like so much. I haven't seen my family in 2 years. Like, I was like, what's happening right now? And it was that moment that clicked in my head where I was like, I got to get some goals around me, not just like business, right?
Well, they incept us to believe that we cannot have both, and it's not true. And
Yeah.
I'm living proof of that. It's not true. Like, you can go out and get everything you want. Like, As a child, my first dream was to be a novelist because I love to write. And then I
Okay.
thought, I'm never going to make any money from this. Like at 10 years old, I thought that I'm never going to make money from this. Like, how often does someone hit it big being a novelist? I guess I'll be a lawyer because lawyers make a lot of money. It's a stable living. I'm good at like, writing and arguing things from both sides. Let me just try that. And then I worked my life to be a lawyer. And then in my legal job, I had no creative power. I had no alignment because I had to take the cases they gave me. I had to do the work they told me to do. I wasn't able to be me. I couldn't have my pink hair. I couldn't wear my cute outfits. I had to look a certain way. And I freaking hated it. And they teach us that you have to choose. Then I had kids and I was like, well, I don't want to choose now. Like, I want it all. I don't want to give up my career and be just a mom. Like, and that is not derogatory, by the way. Being a mom is the most important thing I do.
Mm-hmm.
It's the hardest thing I do. And
Mm-hmm.
any mom out there, I respect you, any parent at all. But for me, it wasn't enough. I still wanted to make sure that I had my career intact. That was really important to me too. And I was told, well, you're a lawyer and you're going to work 100 hours a week and that's it. And like family second and third. And I said, no, I'm creating a life where that is not true.
Yeah.
And if you can just break a few of those glass ceilings, like, and just, think outside the box, you can make the life you want work for you.
Mm-hmm.
But you got to get out there and start making it happen because it's not going to be handed to you. There's no pre-crafted job out there that fits all the boxes that you want. It's something that you're going to have to make yourself.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Um, and the sooner that you can kind of understand at least the general direction that you want to go, the better. The better. At least in my own experience, because I have to remind myself, on a daily basis, and of okay, cool, because we all nag out, right? But what are my goals? Like, what are the activities that I got to get done today that are going to make me feel better? Because if you're, and I talk to a lot of people, that suffer with anxiety and depression and going through these things, going through all of these elements of being in like startup mode of a business. And they're, they, most of them are kind of lost in what they want, or they change it consistently because they just haven't made a finite decision of, okay, I'm aiming at this bullseye and I'm not going to change it. I'm making like a full dedication to get there. And when you get your momentum and consistency, that's where you get like all of your self-confidence from. Like the more you can be consistent about that and create that momentum, you're going to live a better life. Like you're just going to feel better.
I agree. I agree. And consistency, like it all starts with just kind of creating a routine that works for you. Because I feel like people get really upset about consistency because it seems like such a big onerous task.
Yeah.
But again, and you see the theme here, guys, is like start small because
Mm-hmm.
those small movements eventually create massive impact. So for me, when I started consistency, I started just working out every day, like
Mm-hmm.
every day. Didn't matter the time. I didn't put that in my brain. Like didn't matter. I just had to do it once a day.
Yep.
I started to kind of get in a groove, right? And then I figured out when was the best for me. And then I started saying, okay, this time every day, that's when I'm going to do it, right? That helped me be more consistent. And I just kind of took some small steps from there. And I went from waking up before my kids because it drive me crazy to wake up at the same time as them.
Yeah.
I get so cranky and everything. So I started dialing it back. I woke up a half an hour before them, got a short workout in. Then I started craving more, dialed it back. Right now, I wake up at 4 and I get my workout, my meditation, my gratitude. I do some work all before anyone else is awake. And that's what works for me. But I didn't go from, 8 o'clock to 4 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
I went gradually backwards, right? I tried to take small steps. And so consistency just starts with you consistently thinking about how you can do something on the regular.
Yeah.
And I think if you think about it that way, it's a lot less scary.
Yeah. And I think you nailed it too, right? Is that keystone of exercise. Like you knew you needed to focus on one thing only. And once you got consistent on that, it sounds like you saw consistency in other parts of your life as well.
Oh, of course, because it's just you get so dialed in, then you have more time. The consistency helps you form a habit that
Mhm.
becomes your routine, which becomes just part of your daily grind.
Yeah.
Now I don't even think about it. It's not
Yeah.
something that I have to consciously think about. I just wake up and I do my things because now it's who I am, who I train myself to be. But getting up to that is just creating that routine for yourself, whatever that is. And for me, it does start with physicality. Um, and if that's not part of your regimen, don't be scared because it doesn't have to be like go out and be weightlifter champion, right? You could just
Yeah.
like walk. If you have a 9 to 5, go on your lunch break and walk for 10 minutes.
Yep.
That's it. That's all it takes to start forming a habit. And I think when you look at it that way, it seems pretty easy, right? Like who can't make 10 minutes?
That's true. Yeah, it's kind of like the idea of just starting, right? Like I think is it Mel Robbins has like this 5 second rule. I use the 2 minute drill, but for myself, like I put a 2 minute timer on for stuff that I when my force of average is hitting. I'll just put a 2 minute timer on. It's like okay, cool, start, and an hour later I'm done, and I'm like, oh, or 45 minutes or 10 minutes. Like it depend like just depends on what you're trying to start, right? If I
Yeah.
have to write and I'm like, I have to write, 3,000 words today. Okay. 2 minute timer start. And the next thing I know, I'm like 1,500 words in and I'm like, okay, great.
Yeah. I mean, I think you and I love writing, but a lot of people are probably like, that's how I feel when people talk about math. I'm like, math, no,
Jim.
not math.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but to me, writing, wow, it really sets you free. I just feel like so in the zone when I'm writing. And, even people who write books, like they're like, how did I want to write a book? How did you do it? It's the same answer. It's like you start with something. So the
Hmm.
first couple of weeks, I was writing for like 15 minutes a day, which is
Yeah.
nothing. By
Yeah.
the end of it, I was like sitting at my desk for a couple hours at a clip, and that's just how you build up to it. So I think, people need to just realize that their dreams, their biggest, loftiest, craziest dreams that they're dreaming about are just a few small steps away. But you just got to take that first step and see where you go from there, see where it takes you.
Yeah.
Because I could tell you 2 years ago, the life I live right at this exact moment, I never thought that was possible. Never. It felt so far removed. If you told me, like, hey, in 18 months from now, you're going to speak in front of 3,000 people, I'd be like,
Yeah.
no, I'm not. What would I even say? I can't even write a Facebook post every day. Like, but that's legit the life I was leading 2 years ago. It's
Yeah,
it's crazy what those small steps add up to, and
they do.
what you think's impossible now is going to be your regular in just a few years if you start.
Hmm.
Otherwise,
I
you'll be
agree.
sitting here in a few years still dreaming about it.
Yeah. But the idea of a few years for a lot of people, again, and going back to what we talked about is like just start today, right? Like don't like yes, you're gonna have an end result that you have kind of in mind, but just get started. That's it. Like
And you know what, the best parental metaphor I've have, which, like, I don't know if your audience has a lot of children, but if you are a parent.
yes.
Oh, okay, perfect. If you're a parent, you've probably heard this saying, but I think it's also true for business. And if you think about business in these terms, it might seem a little bit more tangible for you.
Hmm.
But they say in parenting, the days are long and the years are short.
Hmm.
And I think that's the perfect way to describe business. It's like every day you feel like you're drowning or you're not doing enough or you don't know what you need. And then you look back and a year went by and you're like, holy crap, I just changed my life in 1 year. I went from 0 to 100,000 in a year,
Yeah.
right? Or, I did these 55 things in a year, but
Mhm.
every day felt like torture. But at the end of that year, those days added up. Those are those small steps. Each of those days is that small step. So if every day you wake up and you just do something towards the goal, you can't not push the needle forward. It's impossible not to push it forward to some
Yep.
degree.
Mhm. There's always a hurricane. You just got to find the sunshine And like, no matter whether you're sailing around it or you're sailing straight through it, like most people through experience, you're going to like, once you get experience, you're going to sail around it. Right. But most of the time you have to go through all of those like life lessons and the crappy days that felt like torture that at the end you look back and you go, that was worth it. Now that I think about
Yeah.
it, that
And
was so
also,
worth it.
like timing is so important. And, some things they're just given to you when the time is right.
Yeah.
So, the biggest example I can think of in my life is when my whole dream was to go to law school. And I worked from when I was 12 years old all the way through college just to go into law school.
Yep.
I worked my butt off. I gave up party animal nights with my friends. I gave up like social events, relationships, all the things that people do.
Mhm.
I kind of gave them up to be a nerd and study my butt off. And I didn't even get into law school after all that. I
Oh,
didn't get into the
I didn't
schools
know
that I
that.
wanted.
Oh,
I didn't even, and
I
I was
didn't know that.
crushed. Oh my God, it was so crushed. So it was like you find out, I don't know, at the end of the school year, so like April or May, you find out, and I got waitlisted. And I was like, well, that dream's dead, right? Like I'm just not gonna go to law school and I'm gonna have to figure it out. And I made a pivot. I got a job. And in August, when classes started, I got a call like the night before school started, and they were like, "Guess what? You're not on the wait list anymore. If you want, you can show up tomorrow."
What?
Um, I was
Did
like,
you freak
"Huh?"
out?
Yeah, I freaked out, and there was something about it. Like looking back on it now, this is going to sound a little pompous, but it wasn't handed to me. I worked very, very hard and diligently,
Hmm.
but I kept getting what I wanted, right? Like I wanted the A's, I got the A's. I wanted a good college, I got into that. I wanted to get summa cum laude, I got that, right? And then all of a sudden I didn't get what I wanted. I was like, oh, that dream, you ain't getting that. And I was
Mm.
kind of like, well, what do you mean? If I work for it, I get it, right? Like that's what's happened my whole life. I worked and worked and worked, and then I got it.
Hmm.
And the universe is like, nope. And so then I was like, oh my God, like my whole life's gonna fall apart. P.S. I got into the school I wanted to the night before classes started, which was a total disaster because in law school they give you all this work to do over the summer and you're supposed to show up day one ready to answer questions
Oh
that are super
no.
scary and hard. And I had a fear of public speaking at that point, which is ironic looking at
Yeah.
me now. And
I
so
would
I'm
say that's
like
a pretty big fear for most people. Yeah.
100%. And so I was like, oh my God, I'm going to get called on and I'm not going to know it because I didn't even have an opportunity to learn it. And everyone's either going to think I'm stupid or they're going to know I just got in last night. And law school is really competitive. So I was terrified. That was the most humbling 6 months of my life because I went from being the smartest person in the room to the dumbest person in the room. And what I can tell you is being the dumbest is so much better because you have so much more opportunity to grow.
Yeah.
And I almost failed out of school that first semester because I started so far behind and it was difficult. And I got the
Yep.
first C of my entire life in contract
Oh
law.
my
Meanwhile,
gosh.
I wanted to be a corporate lawyer. Go figure that one out. But guys, the point of the story is like, you like just because you want it real bad and you work for it doesn't mean you get it when you want it. Sometimes the timing has to be more divine and you
Mhm.
don't understand why. But now looking back on that part of my life, I know that made me the badass I am now. That made me tough as nails. That gave me a humble sandwich that I needed very desperately. And without that, I wouldn't have been able to do a lot of the stuff that I've done and I wouldn't have pushed myself as far as I have. So I think sometimes we don't really realize why we're going through certain things, but just the fallacy is when you don't learn the lesson from it. So if things are
Yeah.
happening to you and you're like, why me, poor me, why me? Start diving into it and figure out what the lesson is. Because the quicker you learn it, the quicker you get to overcome it and you get to use that to catapult you into the next phase of your growth.
I
So
love
that's
that.
how you have to look at every problem.
I love that. I love that because that's a lesson that I've learned myself is, find the lesson in the failure. Find, continue to evolve. And because if you're willing to open yourself up to that, and you have to be willing, and like you have to set your ego aside. Like a lot of people have that issue of like setting, okay, no, I'm this person, or I'm strong, or I'm tough, or like I've got this persona that people think about me, and if I do X, Y, and Z, they're gonna think less of me, right? Like the people who are in your life that have your back are willing to like see that from you, like see that evolution, see that you're gonna fail, you're willing to fail, and like the more vulnerable you can get, the faster you're going to evolve. And people are scared of that because they don't necessarily want the feedback, or they're scared that they're not living up to someone else's expectations of them. And in reality, it's like, well, what are your expectations for yourself? Right. And, just like if you keep finding those lessons in your life, you'll find those small wins and then you'll keep moving.
I think to your point, the best thing someone could do for themselves is find a person they respect
Mm-hmm.
that has done something similar to what they're looking to do, and look to that person for your feedback. Because a lot of the times the people we're asking for feedback are people like our parents or our siblings or our best friends who we have this high emotional connection to,
Mm-hmm.
and who may not be the best people to give advice in the thing that we're looking for. Sometimes they are,
Mm-hmm.
but
Yep.
look around and say to yourself, who can I ask that will really give me some feedback that I can take in? Because when we look to the wrong people and we look to them because of this emotional connection, what they say to us can really hurt because they know us so well.
Mm-hmm.
The things that we don't like about ourselves or we feel insecure about, they already know. And so sometimes the things that they say we can take and kind of like let it hit that soft part of us that's like, licking wounds over something.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas
Yeah.
if you go to someone who's like strictly in a professional capacity that you're looking for guidance from on a certain issue, it hurts less when they tell us the cold hard truth about what's going on, right? They
Mm-hmm.
see things from a neutral perspective. There's none of that emotion going on, and it's easier to really take it in stride and it from a constructive place than an emotional place. So if you are someone that struggles with getting feedback because of the emotions that it brings up, I would suggest trying that, and see if that is a better way for you to, get a microscope on you in a less emotional way.
Yeah. 100%. And that's really a massive key of, the transition of the real you in the now to the ideal you of who you want to become, and, what those results are going to look like, right? And what your goals are. So I do that a lot. I'm lucky enough to have people in my life like yourself, and like other people that give me feedback on, on things that I can do better. And just constantly seeking that and putting your ego aside is incredibly empowering, because sometimes you'll hear something differently from somebody else that you needed to hear, that you already knew in your brain, but you were telling yourself you were telling yourself in a certain way, but you heard it from them. Just like you can hear something 100 times, then all of a sudden it clicks. Like you need to get that feedback in order to really keep that evolution going, because that's how we get the most amount of fulfillment, is overcoming challenges and
I
all of
agree.
those lessons. It's
I
not the
completely
money.
agree.
Yeah.
No, the wins you don't learn anything from, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I overcame a challenge to this win, but yeah, shoot, like it's really it, yeah, the easy wins are not what helps you. So if you're constantly seeking easy, you'll find later on, I think, in life that it's going to be, you're not going to be as fulfilled when you get.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, the hard stuff that you're avoiding it because it butts up against your insecurities. There's really no other reason why you're so scared. You're
Yeah.
scared to fail. You're scared what other people will think, like you mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And really, the truth is, no one cares. You're the only one that cares, because everyone else, you're a fleeting thought, right? No one else is going to be affected by your decisions. It's just you who's affected. So, like, even if some hater says something, like they say it and then they're poof out of your life, the
Mm-hmm.
long-standing opinion is your own. And so if something is you're really struggling with doing something, it's normally because that's a pressure point for you. And you need to really lean into that and figure out why. Why does that insecurity exist and how can you overcome it and, take command of it? Because
Yeah.
that's the superpower is to see your insecurity and be like, I'm going to press that button real hard and see what happens. And then you press it and you press it and you get triggered and you get triggered. And then one day it stops hurting. And then
Yeah.
one day you're like, it's behind you and you're like, oh shit. And then, the next year you don't even see it because you're so far ahead and it's so far in your rear view. And that, my friends, is the biggest superpower for sure.
Bingo. Yep. And I'm curious though, for anybody here, like if you were gonna start on labeling those for yourself, right? And we've talked about writing and how important it is, but I'm curious, if it wasn't writing, what do you think would be like some other ways for people to actually identify those insecurities, get them down, and start on like their strengths and weaknesses? What would you do?
You don't need to write to figure that out. I mean, in law school, I was really scared to speak up, as I mentioned. And
Mhm.
so I said to myself, well, F it. I'm going to try out for moot court and force myself to speak in front of people who are judging me and see what happens. And I'm just going to put all my effort into slaying it. And that's exactly what I did. I put myself in the scenario that I feared the most
Mhm.
because that allowed me to stop letting the fear control me and take control of the narrative. Now, that doesn't mean I wasn't scared. I was terrified. And this is just one example that really stands out. There's so many more, but I was terrified, like completely terrified, but it didn't stop me. I pushed through the fear and I thought, well, if I fail, I fail. And at least I'm not afraid anymore. Because the failure is the thing I'm afraid of. So if I fail, well, now at least I know what it's like to fail. And then the worst is behind me. And if I
Yeah.
win, then I freaking win.
Yep.
And who doesn't want to win? And I won. I even got a job offer out of it, out of the
What?
thing that I hated the most. So you don't need to write to figure it out. You already know the things that scare you. You already know the things you avoid. The things you avoid are the things you fear. And those are the things you need to start figuring out how to lean into a little more. So if that's writing, start writing. If it's speaking, start speaking. If it's standing up for yourself, start standing up for yourself. If it's like creating time for yourself and you're scared to say it, start creating that time. If it's going on vacation and spending money, go spend a little money. You know what I'm saying? Like do the thing that scares you and see what happens because I bet the worst that can happen is far a lot better than what you think it is.
Definitely. 100%. I agree with that. I have a very similar story to the way one of my professors did that to us in at Villanova. And he was like, he made us stand up and basically presentations, and then you had all your peers give you feedback, both positive and negative. And it was like, it was terrifying,
Yeah,
terrifying. But it definitely got me a lot better at public speaking. And it sounds like it's done the same thing for you. You know,
100%.
yeah, it's very cool. Very cool. So I'm, you know, curious in terms of, for the listeners that are out there, how can they find you? I know you've got your coaching program, you speak on stages, you know, why don't you talk a little bit more about that?
Okay, yeah. So you can always find me and DM me at the Jessica Dennehy on Instagram. That's where I am the most.
Yep.
Also, the same handle on Facebook. I answer all my DMs. So if you want me to speak at your event, you're interested in hashing that out, please contact me through Instagram or Facebook. Send me a follow. If you'd like to apply for my coaching program, you can visit my website, which is pivotandslay.com. And we can, chat about what that would look like. And yeah, that's it. I'm on the socials every single day. So that's the
Yep.
best way to find me.
Crushing it. You crush
Oh,
it
my
on the
book. My
socials.
book's on Amazon and on my
There you go.
website also, but it comes in paperback, hardcover, paperback,
Yeah.
Audible, or Kindle. So I've got all the things and
Love it.
That's Pivot and Slay is my first book. Startup Legends is my second, and my
That's right.
third is in work. So stay tuned for that.
Oh yeah, that's right. You did Startup Legends, right? With was that with
Yeah, it's a bunch
Tom?
of
Yeah,
people.
Thomas Kale and like a bunch of other people too.
Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, as always, it is such a pleasure to talk to you and just have conversations with you, Jessica. I mean, very insightful. If you guys did not get anything out of this, you need to go rewind it because there's a lot of really great stuff she just dropped for you guys today. So, Jessica, I want to thank you for your time as always, and just being that shining light out there, and especially with your shoes. I know how good you are with wearing the freaking top notch shoes in the room every single time I see you. So,
Thank you.
but yeah, give Jessica a follow, and drop us a review if this helped you in any way. Please share it with somebody that you feel like it's going to help them. And until next time, this is Josh Meunier, aka Slick, and I am out.